Okay, so our next video here is going to focus on using our Apple IIs with software we download over the internet. That's right, we can take our Apple IIs and download software from the internet and run them today. Because if you know, one of the biggest challenges of using one of these older computers, particularly Apple IIs, is a complete lack of software. And so what we can do with the help of a website online and a couple of tricks is we can make our Apple II think that it is getting new software off of a cassette tape and run it just like you see here on my screen. So the example I've got here is Number Munchers. This was an application that my elementary school used to teach children how to multiply and find factors and add, subtract, and so on. So I'm going to walk you through the process and point out what materials you need before getting started. The first two things you're going to need, which I think probably go without saying, is you're going to need an Apple II. This particular model is really a third generation Apple II. We had the Apple II, then we had an Apple II Plus that had a little bit more RAM, and then we had the Apple IIe that I have featured here. The Apple IIe has more RAM, and it does support the ability to use color monitors and so forth with a composite connection. One of the things I did not have prior to doing this video series was a 5¼ inch floppy disk drive. Now, this is a drive that I grew up with as a kid, but for some of you younger viewers, you've maybe never seen one of these. This is what we used to download, or to run software, to save software. These Apple IIes and II Pluses and original IIs did not have hard drives in them. So everything ran off of a disk and was saved onto a disk. And if you wanted to be able to run software and save data from it, you would ideally need two of these drives. And so if you look online on eBay or whatnot and try to find some of these Apple IIs, you'll see maybe an older style drive. It's got a black front and the original Apple logo on it. They would typically put these side by side and then stack the monitor on top. This drive that I have here, and I'll focus on it a little bit closer, this is a drive that came with the Apple IIc. Now, the Apple IIc was a computer that came out roughly around the same time as the Apple II Plus. It was a computer designed for those that maybe weren't very good with commands. They themselves were not, maybe, I won't say not tech savvy. You kind of have to be tech savvy to use any kind of computing device. But it was designed for those that maybe weren't as invested in learning how to use an operating system and how to do any kind of coding. So they came out with an Apple IIc. The Apple IIc came with a smaller chassis for the case, and it had a small monitor, a monochromatic monitor of green screen that sat on top of that particular monitor. And while that monitor and that computer were fairly proprietary, meaning not all the software on the Apple IIc works on the IIe, it did come with the drive that is backwards compatible with an Apple IIe. So I just happened to have a IIc laying around, and I just grabbed its drive, and it works perfectly. I've gone ahead and opened up the inside of my Apple IIe so that you can really see what is necessary in order to operate a disk drive off of an Apple II. So you have a couple of options. If you're going to use the drives that were designed for this model that have that black front, you're going to need to add in the Disk II interface card. This is a card that fits into one of these, I don't know if they called them ISA or ISA slots on Apple IIs, but in the PC world, that's certainly what they look like, is ISA slots. You need to install one of these expansion cards in, and then connect in the upper right the cable for the first drive, or drive number 1, and then a second ribbon cable to the bottom right of the card for drive number 2. I did not have, or do not still have, the Disk II drives that came with this computer. So in order to get my Apple IIc drive to work with my Apple IIe, I needed to go on eBay, and I was able to come up with this little nugget. It wasn't too expensive, about 40 bucks or so. And this Apple II card is designed to work with the IIc drive. So there are still some folks out there that have these surplus parts and are reselling them, and I just got really lucky at the right time and found this particular card. By the way, those of you that have been in the PC business for a while, most of those IDE ribbon cables are just boring gray cables, but look how pretty the ribbon cable is for an Apple 2C disk drive. I was really pretty wowed by that. I've done this for a long time, and I thought really these cables only came in gray, or if you were working with Commodores, maybe a light blue, but this thing here is every color of the rainbow, so I thought that was really pretty cool. Okay, then we get to the back side of the Apple IIe. You can see we have a pretty traditional 120 volt AC power cable that needs to be plugged into this computer. Same power cables that we're using on modern desktops today, so that wasn't hard to find. But then we take a look at the rest of the ports down here, and you can see that this particular 2C drive uses a cable. Right here you can see it, and it really is, I haven't counted the number of pins. I know it's not a DB25 plug, but it looks very similar to it. And so that drive and that, that drive card and that cable plug in, so the drive now is connected to the computer. While we're there also, and this is really important, and that is, how do we connect a modern TV? Well, the particular Samsung TV that I have still has RCA composite connections to it. And not all smart TVs today are continuing with this. This is a pretty old standard, been around for a very long time. RCA came up with this standard. In fact, it's referred to often as an RCA composite connection. And that's this yellow cable down here. You'll notice that they only have the yellow for video. There is no stereo white and red connection for RCA. So in order to hook up audio cable, we use a mini jack cable. Now, I say an audio cable. Those are not audio jacks. This is not how the Apple IIe emits audio. It does that with a built-in speaker that is mounted to the case and connected to the motherboard. So there isn't going to be fancy audio connected to your TV or to a surround sound system. That simply is not going to happen, at least not to my knowledge. It's possible. I'm sure you might be able to add a Sound Blaster card in there that exists and then hook that up to a TV, but I don't have the Sound Blaster card that was available at this time period. So what these mini jack cable ports are for is to be able to hook up a cassette drive. Now, if you are fairly young and do not have any idea what I'm talking about, you might want to pause the video and go look up what is a cassette tape and then what is a cassette tape drive. So prior to CDs and after 8-tracks, tapes, one of the ways that was very popular for really the early 80s to the beginning of the 90s, before CDs become affordable, is folks use cassette tapes. And it actually had a film that magnets used to change the data that was actually on the tape. And so if you were not going to use a disk drive, you could actually buy software on cassette tape, and that sounds so foreign and weird today now that we download everything. And even those of us that grew up in the 80s and 90s, cassette tapes were very popular for sending software, and we saw that in the Commodore world, we saw that with Tandy computers, we saw that with some of the early IBMs, and definitely with Apple. So before disk drives were really affordable, folks were hooking up cassette tape drives. Now, the way this would work, and this could almost be a separate video in itself, is you would buy the software cassette tape, play it. So you would actually press the play button, and it would send the audio from the cassette tape player through this cable and into the computer. And then the computer then would interpret the pitches from the audio as binary data. And I know that sounds kind of crazy to wrap your mind around, but there are plenty of YouTube videos out there that walk through how this works. But essentially, the pitches in the audio would be interpreted as binary data, and then that is interpreted as software. So what we're going to do is not use cassette tapes. One, I have no need to do that. Here we are, 2020. What we're going to do is we're going to hook up a modern iPad. Play some software files that I will show you from a website, and those software files then will come in just like the cassette tape data did into the computer, and then voila, you have Number Munchers, Oregon Trail, any of those games you want. So that's coming up next once I reassemble this computer, is how do we get the software, and then how do we put it onto disk. Okay, this may be the biggest challenge for some of you out there that may try to do this with your Apple IIes at home, and that is just simply coming across 5¼ inch disc. I'm a little ashamed of myself. Over the past 15 years, I've thrown tons and tons of these away in dumpsters. We threw away 5¼ when we switched over to 3½ inch disc, and then we completely got disc. By the way, that's my cat. We completely got rid of disc altogether as we were switching over to CDs, and then from CDs we start downloading everything from the internet today, right? I'm telling you what you already know. But you can find these discs online on eBay. There's a variety of sellers that still have them. Because of how rare and scarce they are selling for considerably more than they probably are worth, or definitely more than they cost new. You could get these at Best Buy, Walmart, just about every store sold these in the electronics department. But you'll want to go ahead and get some 5¼ inch floppy disk. This particular box, these are double-sided, high density, and these are the ones that I am going to use. And I reuse these discs. If I try it downloading an application or a game and I don't like it, no problem. I can rewrite data over these discs and start over. Okay, the veteran PC users out there are probably going to laugh at this next part. And I'm going to show how to insert a floppy disk into a floppy disk drive. And that's because some of my younger viewers, some of my students, have no idea how this works. And I've even shown drives to students and they don't even know how to begin. You've maybe seen the series Teens React, and it's a great example of how if you didn't grow up with this stuff, you don't know how to use it. So essentially we have the floppy disk itself. And you can see when looking at the disk, while it is square and it looks like it's symmetrical, it's not quite. So you can see the middle part here is where we can safely handle it. So there is a ring, so you can put a finger in there. This was how we were supposed to safely hold disk, although I would argue it's safest to hold them on the outside. They are floppy, which means, they do flop in the wind, they do bend, and you want to be careful. Unlike CDs, these really can't be bent too much because once you put a crease in these, the disc on the inside, the actual material does not spin properly. So you want to handle these a lot more delicately than you would the 3½ inch discs that come out later. So the part that has the oval at the very top, this is actually the part of the disc that is going to be exposed to the magnets inside the disk drive. And so magnets will actually go and change the data that is actually on that film inside the disk. Not terribly that much different than the way our hard drives worked prior to the introduction of SSD drives. So our platter-based drives, had little boom arms that would essentially move around to the different parts of the disk and change the magnetivity of it, which gets interpreted as binary data by the circuitry. Okay, so that part has to go in first, and so we're just going to line this up just like it looks and shove it all the way in. Now, the older Apple II drives that came with this one, you would actually just flip a door down. On the 2C model, we actually push down and kind of pull a little bit forward, and now the disk is locked inside the drive. Alright, so the magical website that I'm going to recommend for this is ASCIIExpress.net. Now, full disclosure, I have no affiliation with this website. I do not know the owners or creators or anything like that. This is a website that I simply came across while doing a Google search and was just amazed that it exists. And it has a full catalog of a large amount of the software that was ever available for the Apple II series. And so you just go to ASCIIExpress.net and they list all the games. You want to scroll down eventually to the part that says download software for disk, and that'll pop up here in a second. But once you do, you find your application such as Oregon Trail, and then you decide what type of data do you want to access. So there's format, hi-fi, with high fidelity. So that's the one that I use, and I choose the format option because I want the disk to be formatted. A lot of the disk I'm using, they're all 30, 40 years old. They have other data on them that I want to erase. Some of them were used on an IBM PC, and so I need to format them in a data format that the Apple IIs recognize. So I always choose format hi-fi, and then I would press play to send the data over. So a lot of credit I need to give to ASCIIExpress.net. I hope this website lasts forever because this is your secret place to get all of the software that you need for your Apple II series. Okay, so here we are. Earlier step I showed how to put a disc in, so I went ahead and I took that disc back out. Not all the way out. I'm going to use this disc, but the way the sequences work here is my task is to start the computer first, and then I'm going to run load, which is a command on the Apple computer that means basically load any software that's either on disk or on cassette tape. Then I will press play on the software website, and it will begin to play the sound. Now, on my iPad, what I really need to do at this point is I need to hook up an audio cable to my iPad. So the cable that you need if you're going to use a modern iPad, and that is a Lightning to mini jack audio cable. This came out with the iPhone 8, I believe. You can get these online. You probably can get them at the Apple Store, though I can't guarantee that. Especially, I don't know what year you're going to watch this video. But this is what the cable looks like. It's a Lightning connection that will fit into an iPhone 8 or an iPad of that area. And then the other end is the audio jack that you will connect your audio cable. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hook up the audio cable that is connected to the back of the Apple computer. It's going to get plugged into this end, and then I'm going to plug this end into my iPad. Then I'm ready at that point to turn on my Apple II, run some commands, and I'll show those to you, and then play the audio through this cable. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the back left corner of the Apple IIe and turn it on. So I'll reach back there and turn it on, something we don't do on modern computers, right? But all those computers of this era, we turned on from the back. Okay. And I'm supposed to then press the control and reset key. So you see reset is up in this corner and control is over on the other side. So a bit of a step. I'm going to set down the iPad for a minute and press those two keys. Okay, so this is what it will look like if you press control and reset. And what this does is it stops the Apple II from being able to boot from the floppy disk drive that's already connected. So this is going to allow me to type in a command. So I'm going to type load, L-O-A-D, and then get ready to press play on that website. After I type in the load command, the Apple IIe will appear to hang, and that's because it is now waiting for data to come from that cassette port. So I'm going to make sure my iPad is connected to that Lightning cable, and I'm going to press play on that website. So here we are. I've pressed play on that website for the Oregon Trail disc that I wanted first. And right now it is telling me that it's estimating that this is going to take about 9 seconds for it to complete. So we'll come back here in a few seconds and see what the status is. Okay, so if everything's successful and it's able to detect your disk drive and the disk inside it, the InstaDisk utility will pop up and it will start blinking loading data. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take and track by track write the data that it's interpreting from the WAV audio file and then write that to disk. So I'll pause and I'll come back and show you a little bit of a status update and then we'll see the end. Okay, so here we are showing you that it is taking the data out. It takes the data really in chunks, displays a message down in the bottom left that says inflating data, writes it to the screen, and then interprets more. So this process is going to go on until the disk is fully written to. And we know it's going to fill this disk because it requires 2 disks for this game. So if it takes 2 disks, then we know the first one's going to be full. So this process will go on. It will continue to keep filling up bar by bar by bar. Okay, so if all went well at this point, you should see all of the tracks filled, and they're filled, they're indicated that they're filled by a white bar that goes from 0 down to F, and it will also say done, press return to reboot. One of the really nice things about this process is that I didn't have to format the disk manually. That is actually included if you choose the right option on the website for each game. So there's an option that says format or not to format. So these disks that I have were originally designed to be used with an IBM PC, but it went ahead and formatted these so that the Apple could read them. and then placed all of the software onto the disk. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter here, and we will hopefully see after rebooting the first disk of Oregon Trail. Okay, so here it is. It's loading from disk 1. And I'll just let you watch it, and there it is. So the software is loading. Hasn't been run on this computer in maybe 20 plus years, but just using this website and following some simple directions, I have Oregon Trail all ready to go, and that's all there is to it. So just like that, we can breathe new life back into an Apple II, play games, type papers, use any of those old applications that we fell in love with, or if you're a bit younger, you can fall in love with for the first time on a retro computer. Again, software can once again be downloaded and installed on 5 1/4 inch disc for Apple IIs. Thanks for watching, everybody.